Hello and welcome to the third episode of my Scourge of War Gettysburg playthrough. Today we're going to be playing the mission Blood in the Run, where we take command of the Iron Brigade and counterattack Archer's Brigade. And now for the history. If you don't want to hear the history, a time will come up on your screen. Wait for it. Now! Bufford's cavalry held the Confederates at bay for 2 hours, forcing them back to Hare Ridge. In the meantime, unbeknownst to the Confederates, the cavalry had been relieved by 2 brigades of infantry at 10 a.m. from the 1st Division of the 1st Corps. The 2nd Brigade under Lysander Cutler, including regiments like the 14th Brooklyn, and the brigade we'll be controlling, the 1st Brigade, made up from volunteers from the frontier of Wisconsin, Indiana, and Michigan. But this brigade went under other names, known by the Confederates as the Black Hat Brigade, for their black hardy hats, and as the Union, as the Iron Brigade, a name it got at the battlefield of South Mountain. When McClellan saw them charge the mountain, he asked which brigade it was. Hooker, who was there, said they were John Gibbon's Westerners. McClellan exclaimed, "They must be made of iron." They were one of the best brigades in the Union Army of the Potomac, able to hold off 5 brigades led by Stonewall Jackson at the Second Battle of Bull Run. They were led by Solomon Meredith, former colonel of the 19th Indiana. However, one of the other candidates for the role was Lysander Cutler, former colonel of the 6th Wisconsin. The 1st Division arrived after doubling over open ground, Cutler's brigade in front with the Iron Brigade in the rear. Cutler's brigade formed up 3 regiments to the north of the cut and 2 to the south, with Hull's battery in the center. Eventually 2 of the regiments north of the cut were flanked by Davis's brigade and forced back. In the meantime, the Iron Brigade, sans the 6th Wisconsin, which was held in reserve, was deployed into the woods, personally by Reynolds, surprising Archer's Brigade, who thought they won after pushing back the cavalry, and a large portion of the 2nd Brigade was forced back by Davis. In the meantime, the 6th Wisconsin rushed to support the 147th New York, who were the last regiment standing against the entirety of Davis's brigade. Welcome back to those of you who didn't want to hear the history. We've just entered the field and we're going to check the battlefield situation and our brigade, as most of the units are regular, going up to veteran. General, this is your best unit. That means this brigade will easily crush most of the other units, as many of the brigades in the Civil War, especially in this early period, would be made up of volunteers of varying quality. As we pass General Reynolds, we go towards the battlefield, and there's Herbst Wood, where we'll be doing the majority of the fighting. And we go over to see Cutler's brigade in position and Davis's brigade in the background. Looking over Willoughby's Run, I look for Archer's brigade, but they are nowhere to be found, and so I go back to my brigade to start them moving to Herbst Wood, as Reynolds' orders come in by courier. General Meredith. General Bufford has delayed the rebels in time for us to relieve him. We must fight on this ground. Part of Cutler's brigade is holding the north of Chambersburg Pike. However, the rebels appear to be moving to flank him through the woods. Deploy your brigade into the woods. When General Doubleday arrives, I will instruct him to defend the Fairfield Road. I have detached the 6th Wisconsin to act as a reserve. After skimming over the orders, too quickly, I continue moving my brigade forward, except for the 6th Wisconsin, who are detached and so are moving to guard the ammunition, which I don't realize until a few minutes later. In the meantime, I detach the 2nd Wisconsin to guard our flanking step, as it's our best unit in the brigade, and so I detach it and move it to McPherson's Ridge to guard the artillery batteries. Finally returning to my brigade, I notice that the 6th Wisconsin are moving off to the side, and so I check them. Noticing that they are detached, I reattach them, and give the brigade their orders once again. All the while this is happening, Bufford's cavalry is falling back, having fulfilled his task. One quick side note. One thing that I dislike about this scenario is how big Bufford's cavalry regiments are, as they look like they're at full strength. Going back up to the front line, I check for the rebels once again, and the regiment from Davis's brigade has moved up to attack the 147th New York, but the cannon battery will rake their ranks with fire. And here's a close-up of the men working the guns. before I go over to check Herb's Wood once again, and see that an element of Archer's Brigade is advancing, the 5th Alabama Battalion. And zooming in on the flags of the 5th Alabama Battalion, you can see the detail that has been put in by Reb Bugler in the Bugles and Flags mod that I'm using for this playthrough, before they quickly disappear into the fog of war. And the rebels quickly seize Herb's Wood. And so returning to my brigade, I tell the Iron Brigade to advance at the double, to quickly seize the woods, except for the 2nd, who I tell to carry on at the same pace. As the brigade gathers up to the fence post east of the woods, I tell them to advance into the woods, and I notice the entire force is teeming with Confederates. And so I tell my brigade to move up and form double line formation. And while they're moving up, we follow the 2nd Wisconsin as they move up to support the artillery battery. As they move up, we can see the 147th retreat, as they moved out too far from the other regiments in their brigade, and are overwhelmed by Davis's brigade. As my brigade moves up into the wood, more regiments from the Archer's Brigade show itself. And so I decide to move my troops up in line opposed to column. Sure, they'll move up slower, but they'll react faster when in range of the rebels. However, a side effect of this is they decide to form one single line to engage the Confederates. And so soon afterward I tell them to form a double line, except closer to our current position so the men won't form into column once again. Going over to check the 2nd Wisconsin once again, I notice that the cannon battery has forced the Confederate regiment to take cover, and therefore poses little risk to them. However, in the background we can see more regiments of Davis's brigade advancing. As we advance the final few meters, the Confederates open fire. I tell my troops to advance at a double, and tell the 2nd rank of my brigade to move in on their flanks. As we enter the woods, we surprised the entire rebel brigade. Some of their men fired an unorganized volley. As a result, most missed their mark. Our return fire was devastating to them. I take the 2 brigades now of 2nd rank and move them to the flanks of the enemy, much like the Iron Brigade did at the actual Battle of Gettysburg. Moving the 24th Michigan to get a flank on them, and the 6th Wisconsin to support the 14th Brooklyn. The 24th Michigan originally didn't move, but after ordering them a 2nd time, they successfully moved over to our flank. However, they were slowed by the fence line. Meanwhile, the 6th Wisconsin moved in on the 14th Brooklyn's position to support them, while another Confederate regiment moves up to support the troops already engaged. And so I move up the 6th Wisconsin at the double. As they get into line, their fire is murderous, cutting down the majority of the troops in the rightmost company of the rebel regiment. In the meantime, I tell the 2nd Wisconsin to form into line, as to reduce casualties if they're targeted by rebel artillery, and to easily move into battle if the rebel infantry threatens them. In the meantime, I tell Longsall to move to the McPherson's farmstead to take the victory point. Moving back to the rebel regiments in the wood, they've already taken pretty heavy casualties, considering the battle just started, so General Archer moved up another regiment to support them. But as they draw near, they draw more fire from the 24th Michigan, and are forced to halt before they get to the cover of the fences. Moving over to the 7th Tennessee, the fire they're taking is devastating, as the troops from their rightmost company are almost destroyed, with only 2 men remaining. Even the troops that have just arrived have taken pretty heavy casualties. Please take note that every one of these spikes represents 6 soldiers, just to give a better idea of how many casualties are being taken. Then we were surrounding the wood by black ants, unleashing a hail of fire on us from all sides. Anyone who didn't crouch down was quickly cut down. Moving back to the center of our line, or I guess at this point, the right side of our line, I moved the 2nd Wisconsin closer to the victory point so we can take it, as the cannons are still pinning down the Confederate regiment. Meanwhile, while moving over to the forest, the fight in the field by the forest is still carrying on, though the 1 regiment is being torn apart by the 6th Wisconsin. While finally arriving in the forest, the Confederates in there are doing much better, taking mass casualties as I move in more of my regiments to make their fire more effective. Now I'm sorry that you can't see very well. I'll need to make a mental note when I'm doing the battles of Chancellorsville and Charlotte to turn the trees down so that both of us can see. But that's in the future. I noticed the 7th Wisconsin aren't firing, so I decided to move them forward. While I move them forward, we can look at their score. 44-3. And that's probably equivalent to the majority of our brigades. As they are so elite, Archer's brigade is just melting. And so I charge them up so their rifle fire will be even more accurate. As they get into position, they lay more fire into their ranks. Feeling confident, I moved forward to 24th Michigan in order to push the 5th Alabama Battalion back, and due to the size of our regiment, they fall back. But then some grave news comes in from a courier. General Meredith, it's my regret to inform you that while leading the attack on the wood, General Reynolds has been killed, and that General Doubleday has taken command of the 1st Corps. Despite this tragedy, our men carry on pushing the rebels out of the woods, crying, "Remember Reynolds," as they charged and put fire forth into the rebels. The 24th Michigan are quite near the 5th Alabama Battalion at this point, and open fire upon them. And despite being outnumbered, the 5th Alabama Battalion turns around and shoots at them. And the acts of the 6th Wisconsin are now bearing fruit as I believe it's the 7th Tennessee breaks. And I decide to move them forward to attack the next regiment, the 13th Alabama, the heroes for holding them at bay last time. All the while this is happening, the rebels continue the attack to our front. However, the 14th Brooklyn, with help of the 6th Wisconsin, has pushed them back, and Davis's brigade is coming in to support Archer's brigade. But the 2nd were put in reserve nearby, and so react quickly. Rebels to the front! 2nd Wisconsin, advance at the double quick! Protect those guns! Move! As a regiment of Davis's brigade moves up and threatens our battery of artillery, I rush up the 2nd Wisconsin to defend it, regardless of the fact that it will block the gun's fire. I rush them up to the fence post, even though they go to a field just by the woods, where the rest of my brigade is engaged, and I leave the 2nd Wisconsin here for the majority of the battle, severely hampering our artillery fire. In the meantime, in reaction to this, the 14th Brooklyn move up to attack the 42nd Mississippi, and return to my brigade in the woods. Reroute the 5th Alabama Brigade and I believe the 7th Tennessee around the same time, clearing our way to advance to the victory point. So I move up the rest of my brigade to surround the final regiment, who have already taken severe casualties. To put more pressure on the final Confederate regiment, I order the 6th Wisconsin to fire in advance, covering the 7th Wisconsin who are advancing. All the while Archer is sending out couriers for assistance. Moving back to McPherson's farmstead, it appears that elements of Hull's battery are falling back. All the while, the 14th Brooklyn carries on the firefight in between them and one of the final regiments of Archer's Brigade, while the 42nd Mississippi take cover nearby. Originally pouring flanking fire into the 14th Brooklyn, the final regiment from Archer's Brigade wheels about to face our advancing forces, and the situation described by earlier Confederate troops is far worse as three regiments focus their fire on one final regiment. While the final elements of Archer's Brigade are engaged in the woods, he sends out couriers, and we capture one. The message reads that he's in desperate need of assistance, and it goes to Ambrose Hill, the corps commander. But as Brockenborough and Pettigrew are still too far away, he can do nothing to support them. And much of my brigade is in firing at this point. For example, the 24th Michigan is all not firing except for the far right company. And so I tell them to move up to the victory point in order to give them a clear field of fire to fire into the flank of the final Confederate regiment, as well as securing the victory point for us. Well, sounds the officer, so we won't get any points. In the meantime, Archer has moved up to rally his final regiment. But as he does so, he is shot off his horse. I'm alright, boys. Keep up that fire. Come on, lads. The general's down. Sad General Archer. I'll see you greatly rewarded for this. Soon the pressure becomes too much for General Archer's staff, and they fall back without him. As my regiments close in around the last regiment standing in the wood, the 19th Indiana are difficult when I'm trying to put them into position, flipping around and doing weird movements. And now we see the staff of General Archer falling back, going to explain the capture of General Archer to General Davis. In the meantime, the 2nd Wisconsin have lined down by the battery, laying a trap for any Confederates going to attack it, and they take the bait. As we advance to capture the singular low artillery battery, we advance into the waiting muzzles of a regiment of cannons lying nearby. They turn their faces and fire a devastating volley. And the 55th North Carolina rushed the railway cut to capture the guns, and the 2nd Wisconsin rise and turn about to face them, moving to the edge of the cut. In the devastating fire, the 55th North Carolina run to take shelter in the railway cut itself. However, as they turn about to face our regiment, the leftmost companies leave the cut, and our men open fire upon them. As we shift away from the firefight, we can see another Confederate regiment hiding in a nearby wheat field. As we go back to the firefight in the field, we can see the 14th Brooklyn have pushed back one of the rebel regiments, and that the final regiment of Archer's Brigade in the forest has fallen back, and so I move my brigade into defensive positions, anticipating a counterattack. But by this point we've broken the back of the Confederate forces. They won't make any more than half-hearted counterattacks during this mission, leaving us to push them back to Hare Ridge. In revenge of General Reynolds, our troops fire upon the retreating Confederate forces as they leave the forest and attempt to cross Willoughby's Run, and the staff of General Archer return, hoping to rally their final regiment, but they are too late as they have already withdrawn, and shortly thereafter they go to rally the troops that are fighting in the field. Moving into defensive positions, I move the 24th Michigan to guard Willoughby's Run, and the 7th Wisconsin to guard the flank by the field, with the 6th Wisconsin supporting them from the east of the field. But then I changed my mind and decided to move them to help the 14th Brooklyn. Moving over to the firefight by the railway cut, our troops are still succeeding, even though they've taken some casualties from artillery fire. And interestingly enough, the Confederates are withdrawing outside the safety of the railway cut. Instead of supporting the 14th Brooklyn with the 6th Wisconsin, I elect to counterattack the final forces of the Confederacy in our center, with support of the 7th Wisconsin, as they are already falling back. Earlier on, figuring out that the fight has gone from the woods, I moved the 19th Indiana to support our right flank. And now that the force is secure, I decide to move Solomon Meredith to capture his rightful position of the forest. Not soon after this, the fight of the railway cut concludes as the Confederate forces break, and so I decide to counterattack, attacking the Confederate regiment hiding in the wheat, kind of following history like I've been doing this entire mission, by attacking through the railway cut with the Iron Brigade, except not with the 6th Wisconsin, like in history, but with the 2nd. But then the Confederates hiding in the wheat spring up and open fire. Forward, men! Cross the railway cut! We need to secure the flank in case them Rebs come again. Oh god, they're coming again! We won't be able to stop! Pull yourself together! We won't make it off this field if you don't stop your moaning! As my men figure out the proper position from which to shoot the Confederates from, the Confederates get into position. However, they do not have much fight in them. In the meantime, I'm wondering where the rest of the 2nd Brigade are. So I scan the nearby area and find them observing from the nearby trees. In the meantime, not a few shots later, the Confederates retreat. And so going back to my left flank, I select the 2 regiments that I moved to guard our flank to counterattack the final Confederate forces in the area, who are pinned down by our artillery. Never mind, I guess earlier I made a mistake. Now I move Longsall into the woods to take the victory point. I guess for a quick side note for why they call him Longsall, he was just really tall. At 6 foot 7 inches. In the meantime, the 6th and 7th Wisconsin are attacking the final rebels in our center. The 6th Wisconsin engaged successfully, but the 7th Wisconsin are caught up on the fences and rocks that every single regiment gets caught up on in this battlefield. But as soon as our boys get into range, the 14th Tennessee begin to fire, and the, I believe, 42nd Mississippi attempt a quick withdrawal before General Davis tells them to stop. In the meantime, General Heath is being lost as usual on our far left flank. Here we get to see the rocks and fence in action. As the 6th Wisconsin and the 14th Tennessee continue their firefight, 7th Wisconsin finally get into range of the 42nd Mississippi. However, it's only their rightmost companies, and as soon as they about face to open fire, we become out of range again. And then I go back to the forest where Solomon Meredith has arrived, and so I move back to the 24th Michigan so we can start capturing the point. But as there's a lull in the combat, the wounded are able to get to the rear, going back to the town for help, but they quickly become over capacity. As the battle continued and more infantry came in, the wounded left the field in almost endless lines. The sight of disabled men brought some women to tears. After rushing my troops into position, I quickly tell them to stop as we begin to capture the point, telling them to about face in case any Confederates sneak up on us. Moving back to the counterattack in the field, I try by any means to get the 7th Wisconsin into range. In the meantime, the 6th Wisconsin routs the 14th Tennessee. As they fall back in good order, I tell the 7th Wisconsin to move forward, to attack the 42nd. Moving up both regiments, I finally get them both in range, and they open fire. However, the 42nd hold their ground and open fire, being supported by the Confederate artillery, which finally gets a lucky shot on the 6th. But the 42nd don't have much fight left in them either, and they begin to withdraw, getting out of range of the 6th Wisconsin, but after moving them forward they open fire once again, and then shortly afterward the 42nd withdraw. As my regiments move out to push back the 14th Tennessee once again, they withdraw, despite the attempts of Davis, who quickly follows them. Instead of trying to push my luck and trying to take the Confederate batteries, I instead elect to fall back to my main position to lessen the effectiveness of their artillery. I quickly go over to select General Solomon Meredith to check our points so far, and we're now at 1,800 points, which is enough to get us a victory. However, as my troops withdraw from the fence posts, they take some shell fire and are forced to retreat at the double. However, wanting to get a few more points, I move the 19th Indiana across a railway cut to attack the final rebel regiment on our right flank. As my troops retreat from the shell fire, I didn't notice at the time that the shells were falling, and so I tell them to stop running and to continue walking. However, the 2nd Wisconsin elect to move back in column, which will move them back to their lines faster but will make them more vulnerable to shell fire. Moving back to the 19th Indiana, they are descending the steep gravel slope with the railway cut. As they arrive to the other bank of the railway cut, I wonder if their brigade will come under fire from the rebel regiment hiding behind the nearby fences, while in the background the 2nd Wisconsin is being shelled. And so, wanting to get them pushed back as fast as possible, I move the 19th Indiana up and over the slope at the double. However, they do not come under fire. and catching them in the open ground, the Confederates opened fire upon them. In the meantime, as that firefight begins, another rebel regiment comes in to attack. However, I quickly repositioned the 2nd Wisconsin to counter them. Opening fire upon them as they reform from a long advance into line, our men making a few precise shots at their file closers, sergeants, and officers before they break once again. But the firefight between the 19th Indiana and the 2nd Mississippi carries on. The 2nd Mississippi has become far more confident now that they've caught the Indianans in the open, while they have the relative cover of the fence posts. Thinking that I'll make short work of the rebels now that they've mostly broken, don't think about sending in support. And focusing in on their score, the firefight doesn't go as well as I thought it would, so I go over my line looking for a relatively fresh regiment. All going through my lines, I see that the 6th Wisconsin are facing the wrong way, and quickly tell them to about face, before telling them to take cover once again, even though they're in full morale and endurance. I don't move in the 2nd Wisconsin and risk leaving our battery open for the rebels to attack once again, and noticing that they're under heavy shell fire, I tell them to take cover, and so I decide to move in the 7th Wisconsin. Then I go over to the rebel artillery to see why they're firing so accurately, but strangely enough they haven't moved position. Returning to my lines, I select my commander to see what point level we're at. Seeing that we're near a major victory, I'm satisfied. Then going over to the firefight to see how that's panning out. But suddenly, victory. And just as the firefight is carrying on, victory. We get a victory of 2,782 points. I felt kind of cheated when this happened because I was in the middle of a battle, and I still haven't finished yet. But anyways, now to go on to the units. And the Iron Brigade has done brilliantly, with our lowest scoring brigade getting 21 points, and our highest scoring brigade getting 123. And now on to the 2nd Brigade. And now on to the Confederate units. Dr. York! Dr. York! What is it, Jasper? The Michelson-Morley detector is picking up fluctuations in the ether. Where is it? Hard to say, but 1862 is when. Can you scan by continent? Yes, but it's not very effective. Wait, there was another one. When was that one then? 1815. Strange, it came from the same frequency. What? But that's impossible. That could be. There's still plenty to learn about this technology. But where are they, damn you? I don't know, sir. My god, the entire board lit up. The setting must be set too broad. Aha! There it is. Gettysburg, July 1st, 7:30. It's gone to the biggest battlefield in the Western Hemisphere? It's illegal to go there. It's too key to our history. It must be a mistake. No matter. Looks like we have another egghead to save. Well, you can't just go swanning around the battlefield talking like this. In civilian clothes, you'll get arrested. Simple. There were many European observers in the American Civil War. If I dressed like a British one, in what was then called the United Kingdom, I'll be able to go where I like. Alright, but what about Waterloo? What about it? There are still distortions coming from there. As much as it weighs me to do so, you will have to maintain the situation while I sort out Gettysburg.